Hi, 8th graders. Welcome back. We are going to continue our Unit 3. Today we are learning about Huey P. Long. A reminder of what we've already learned this unit. We began this unit 2 Mondays ago learning about two immigrant groups, immigrants from Ireland and immigrants from Italy who came to Louisiana looking for better opportunities. We know that because they were fleeing bad situations in their homeland. For Ireland, it was the potato famine. For Italy, it was corrupt government. They took jobs that they ordinarily would not have wanted to take, dangerous jobs. The Italians, for example, built the canals in New Orleans. We also learned about the Progressive Era. So this is the era after Reconstruction ends when particularly white middle-class Americans start fighting for better living conditions and for better conditions of people overall. So one was women's suffrage. That means the ability to vote for women. Another was temperance. They wanted to make the sale of alcohol illegal. And another was anti-child labor. They wanted children to not have to work in dangerous factories. Tomorrow you're going to have a checkpoint quiz. It's going to cover everything that we learned last week as well as everything that we're going to learn today. In order to prepare yourself for this, study today's Do Now, study today's Historian Hustle, and then all of the notes that we've taken the last couple of days. If you're studying those materials and refreshing that information, you're going to do totally fine on the checkpoint quiz. So if you haven't already, please answer your Do Now. All right, let's review our answers. So we wanted to match the progressive movement with the goals. Anti-child labor wanted to end unsafe and long working conditions for children. Women's suffrage wanted to earn women the right to vote. And the temperance movement wanted to make the sale of alcohol illegal. On your quiz, a lot of people were getting the suffrage movement and the temperance movement confused. Make sure you don't get them confused. Suffrage is to give the right to vote to women. Temperance is to get rid of alcohol. All right, for this next one, you needed to read the paragraph and then answer the questions. One says, what does it mean to disenfranchise people? So I looked here in the reading and it says to disenfranchise means to take away someone's right to vote. So the correct answer for 1 was A. And then for number 2, what was the effect of the literacy test and the poll taxes? So there was a lot I needed to read to get this answer correct. First, I needed to read about what this reading said the impact of the literacy test was. Here it says by administering the literacy test only to Black voters, Southern states were able to fail Black voters and prevent them from voting. And then with the poll taxes, since many Black families in the South were poor sharecroppers, they could not afford to pay the tax. Therefore, they could not vote. Finally, by 1910, less than 1,000 Black voters were eligible to vote due to the literacy test and poll tax. So 2 says, what was the effect of the literacy test and poll tax? Try to answer that. And the correct answer for this one, was, I don't have it on the PowerPoint, is C. Black voters became disenfranchised. They lost the right to vote. So Southern states claimed that things like the literacy test were to make sure that only smart people could vote, but the true reason they had them was to make sure that Black Americans were not allowed to exercise that basic right of voting. All right, answer your hustle. Press next when you're finished. And let's review your hustle terms. These are all terms that can help you do better on your quiz tomorrow. Number 1 is Irish. 2, progressives. 3, disenfranchise. 4, Jim Crow laws. 5 is women's suffrage. 6 is literacy test. 7 is poll tax. 8 is anti-child labor movement. 9 is Knights of the White Camellia. That was the name of the KKK in Louisiana. And 10 is sharecropper. If you don't have these on your paper, please put them down. And just a reminder, tomorrow you have that checkpoint quiz. Make sure you're reviewing everything that we did in the Do Now and the Hustle today, as well as all of your notes from Unit 3. All right, flip your paper over or look down where it says Framing the Lesson. Pause the video to answer these 3 questions. So here we're thinking about Katrina, and one thing that a lot of you guys are probably thinking about is your parents may talk about how the government did not really respond properly at first to Katrina. A lot of people were left in the city. The city was completely flooded. People died. It was mishandled by the government. Today we're going to learn about a different flood that happened in Louisiana, and it flooded an area right outside of New Orleans called St. Bernard Parish. And we're going to ask ourselves about how the government did respond to this. The question that we want to think about are what are the social, political, and economic impacts of the flood of 1927? So flip your paper over to your notes. And one of the things we want to think about as we do this is what does it mean to look for the social, political, and economic impacts? When we look for social, we're just saying how does this impact how people treat each other? How does the flood impact how the government is going to act? And how does this impact how people spend, or lose their money? Economic means money. So let's flip to our notes and write down today's aim. Today we're going to analyze the impact of the 1927 flood on Louisiana, and we know that we're looking for social, political, and economic impacts. So a little bit about this great flood. In 1927, strong rains and melting snow in the Midwest caused the Mississippi River's water levels to rise so high that breaks in the levees caused cities in North Louisiana to completely flood. So what we have is in Northern America and in the Midwest, it's raining so much and snow caps from mountains are melting so much that there's too much water in the Mississippi River. As that water continues south to Louisiana, the water begins to break the levees. As that's happening, cities are just flooding. So now these high river levels are coming to New Orleans, and city officials are worried, is New Orleans going to flood? So the flooding is getting closer and closer to New Orleans, and city officials have to make a decision. We can do nothing and risk having the entire city of New Orleans flood, or we can break a levee somewhere else. That'll make a different city flood, but it'll protect New Orleans because it'll take some of the pressure off of the levees. Ultimately, what the Louisiana Corps of Engineers decided was we are going to take action. So they deliberately, meaning on purpose, broke the levees near St. Bernard Parish. At this time, it was a very low-income community, but it had mostly white people who were living there. And when they did that, it flooded the entire parish. So it destroyed the city of, or St. Bernard Parish, but it did save the city of New Orleans. So some impacts of this flood. Many Black and white sharecroppers chose to leave their flooded farmlands and just leave the state. So one huge impact is that a lot of poor sharecroppers were like, you know what? My land has flooded. My contract is now null. I'm just going to leave. So this helped them in some ways because it allowed them to break that contract that kept them in the cycle of debt. Another impact is that the federal government invested millions of dollars to build spillways and stronger levees. So the federal government started playing a role in actually making sure that things like our levees were strong enough to deal with floods. Another impact is that following the floods, politicians like Huey P. Long became popular for speaking out against the city's decision to flood St. Bernard Parish. So this man right here is Huey P. Long. And we're going to learn more about him later this week, but he becomes very important to the state of Louisiana. He's elected governor after he speaks about these floods. So the floods help rise him to prominence. All right, you have 3 questions. Answer them on your paper and then answer the questions that pop up on your screen. All right, let's move on. So flip your papers over to the document analysis. We're going to do parts of the first document together, and then you're going to do the rest on your own. Remember, we're trying to answer what are the social, political, and economic impacts of the flood of 1927. And we look for social, we're looking at how is this changing how people treat each other? For political, how is this changing the government? And for economic, how is this changing people's money or the way that money is being spent, saved, or lost? So let's look at source 1. So we're going to answer the first question using the first paragraph. So one of the things we're looking for is what caused the flooding? Let's read. As we're reading, feel free to underline on your paper. Track your paper as I read aloud. So this is an excerpt from the Mississippi River flood of 1927 by the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica. After several months of heavy rain caused the Mississippi River to swell to unprecedented levels, the first levee broke on April 12th along the Illinois shore. Then, on April 21st, the levee at Mound's Landing in Mississippi gave way. Over the next few weeks, essentially the entire levee system along the river collapsed. In some places, residential areas were submerged in 30 feet or 9 meters of water. At least 2 months passed before the floodwater completely subsided or went down. In the aftermath, authorities were severely criticized for favoring the white population during the rescue and relief operations. So using paragraph 1 of source 1, what caused the flooding? All right, let's check our answer. So what caused the flooding? It was heavy rains and melting snow in the Midwest, which caused the levels of the Mississippi River to rise. We're going to use paragraph 2 to answer question number 2. Using source 1, how were African Americans treated during this tragedy? So let's read paragraph 2. Track your paper in 3, 2, 1. Thousands of plantation workers, most of them African Americans, had been forced to work in deplorable conditions, shoring up the levees near Greenville, Mississippi. Then, as the waters rose, they were left stranded for days without food or drinking water, while white women and children were hauled to safety. African Americans gathered in relief camps. They were also forced to participate in relief efforts, while receiving inferior provisions for themselves and to clean up flooded areas. At least one black man was shot, reportedly for refusing to work. So using paragraph 2, answer question number 2. How were African Americans treated during this tragedy? All right, let's check our answer. So they were forced to work difficult jobs to prevent the flooding, and then after the flood, they were left stranded and then forced to work the relief efforts. So number 3, we're going to read the last paragraph to answer both 3 and 4. And those are asking what changes occurred politically and then what changes occurred socially. Track the last paragraph. It says, the flood brought about long-term social and political changes in the country. Over time, African Americans largely switched their loyalty from the historically anti-slavery Republican Party, which was the party of President Calvin Coolidge, the president at the time, to the Democratic Party. In addition, the disaster contributed to the great migration of African Americans from the South to cities in the North. African Americans used the flood as reasons to finally leave their lives as sharecroppers and escape the increasingly growing racism and oppression in the South. So we want to ask ourselves what changes occurred politically and what changes occurred socially. I'm going to keep this up on the screen while you answer those 2 questions. Press next when you're done. All right, let's review the answers. So what changes occurred politically? Black voters they changed political parties and they began to vote for the Democratic Party. And then what changed socially? Many Black Louisianans left their sharecropping contracts and they migrated north. All right, source 2, you're going to do on your own. Make sure you read the questions first and then read the documents. Use the document to answer your questions. All right, let's review our answers. Question number 1, according to source 2, how was government aid viewed in the 1920s? In the 1920s, they felt that people who needed help from the government were weak and immoral. However, number 2, did the government help flood victims? And let's quote evidence to support our answers. So number 2 says the federal government did not pay for any aid to flood victims at first. And I put 2 quotes here. You could have put some other quotes from this reading, but I thought these 2 were particularly relevant. Not only did the federal government spend nothing to feed, clothe, and shelter these people, the Army demanded reimbursement from the Red Cross for use of its tents and its field kitchens. And then also Coolidge, who was the president, not only ignored numerous pleas to visit the flooded territory, but he refused to even autograph pictures of himself to be auctioned off at fundraisers. So number 3, how did the flood change Americans' views about the responsibilities of government? People began to realize it's okay to accept help from the government, and also it's better to start expecting help from the government. So this flood is getting people, and we see with the progressives wanted the government to play a more active role in improving people's lives, and this flood is helping them help that cause by making people say, hey, the government should play a role in helping us if we flood. All right, source 3, same thing. You're going to read the source and then answer the questions that follow. All All right, let's review our answers. Number 1, using source 3, describe the impact the flood had on citizens. Many people lost their homes, many became poor, and many struggled to rebuild their old lives. Many people lost all of their money and it put them in debt. Number 2, in what ways did the government intervene? The government gave financial support. And number 3, how did the government's role in the natural disaster change over time? As time went on, the government played a more active role in helping people who were affected by natural disasters. All right, close out of this Edpuzzle and log into Elluminate. You're going to click on Unit 3, Exit Ticket 6. Oops, sorry, it should say Unit 3, Exit Ticket 5, The Great Flood. You cannot use your readings from today to answer the question, so pack your desks away. All right, y'all have a great day.